The lanterns were strung like stars across the rafters of the barn, golden glow flickers swaying in the gentle breath of a prairie wind. Horses snorted from the posts out front, their tails flicking lazily in rhythm to the fiddle tunes drifting into the night. Inside, laughter rolled like thunder softened by whiskey and hay. Boots pounded wood, dresses swirled like prairie flowers in a storm. The town of Dry Willow had come alive for its annual spring dance, and every corner of the place buzzed with talk, music, and the quiet ache of people hoping to be seen. And near the punch table, fingers curled nervously around a tin cup, stood May. She wore her mother's lace gloves, yellowed slightly from time, stitched with care, and a dress sheet, sewn herself, cornflower blue with silver stitching along the hem. The fabric hugged her soft curves like it was made to do just that, but May kept pulling at the bodice, as if trying to make herself smaller. Invisible, she wasn't shy by nature, but she'd been taught to be, over time, with stares and whispers and the silence that followed every time she walked into a room full of girls shaped like willows when she was built more like a mountain meadow. Lush, curved, and open. Still, tonight, she had hope, because earlier, Thomas Vane had tipped his hat at her outside the mercantile, said she looked mighty fine, said maybe they'd dance. May had clung to that moment like it was scripture. And now here he came, boots polished, collar high, the kind of man who wore charm like a second skin, until you looked too close and saw it was peeling at the edges. He offered his hand with a smirk that might have passed for kindness if she'd been younger. She smiled shyly, placed her glove in his. And they walked to the floor. The music began. Her breath caught, her steps were careful, floating. She let herself imagine this was it, the beginning of something. But then, as they spun toward the center, Thomas leaned in and said, "Too loud for mercy. Damn shame they ran out of fabric when they made that dress. Looks like you stuffed the whole pantry in it." A burst of laughter. His friends, a few of the women, and worst of all, the silence after. When no one said a thing, May froze. The music kept playing, but she'd stopped hearing it. Her skin burned, her eyes watered. She stepped back, hands slipping from his, and turned toward the doors. The night outside caught her like a cradle. Cool, quiet, no eyes, no mouths. Just the whisper of cottonwoods and the scent of distant horses. She didn't cry right away. She never did. Not in front of them. She walked around the side of the barn, hands still in gloves, breath shallow, as if the shame might leak out if she breathed too deep. And there, near the edge of the corral, stood a man who said nothing. Silas. Leaning against the fence, one boot hooked over the other, hat low over his brow, arms folded like he was holding in the sky. He didn't move when she passed, didn't speak, but his eyes, the kind that saw more than they said, followed her like a slow river trailing moonlight. He'd seen it happen. All of it, and still, he looked at her like she wasn't broken. May walked on, pretending not to notice, but a part of her warmed, ever so faintly, beneath the bruise of that moment. Her cabin sat 3 fields over, half hidden behind wild rose and willow brush. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and lamp oil. She struck a match with shaking fingers, lit the small flame by her mirror, and stared at herself, the freckles dusting her cheeks, the curl at her collarbone, the fullness of her arms, her chest, her hips, the things no man ever celebrated in public. She sat at the edge of her bed, pulled at the gloves like they'd betrayed her, and dropped them onto the floor. Her mama's stitching. Her mama, who used to say, "Darlin', you ain't meant to fit into the world's corners. You're meant to bloom wide across it." But Mama was gone, and the world had been cornering her ever since. May picked up the gloves, turned them over. One tear slipped onto the lace. She held it over the candle until it dried, the edge curling faintly like the page of an old book. Back at the barn, Silas hadn't moved. He was a man shaped by silence, not because he lacked words, but because he knew how rarely they held meaning. 10 years widowed. His ranch kept alive by callous hands and early mornings. Folks respected him, but kept their distance. They said he was too quiet. But they never saw how often he fixed a neighbor's fence without being asked. How he sat with dying horses and whispered things before letting them go. He didn't look for company, but tonight he'd seen something he couldn't forget. A woman who stood tall, and while her heart was breaking, and he'd watched how she didn't ask for pity, only dignity. The music inside grew louder, but he just stayed there, as if the stars above held more truth than anything those barn rafters could. Days passed, and Dry Willow moved on, as towns do, always hungry for the next whisper. But some stories don't spread. Some stay quiet. Some, like the one blooming now, begin not with words, but with glances, and a woman wondering if anyone would ever look at her and see, and a man wondering if she might look back and recognize him. 2. Silas lived on the western ridge, where the wind blew long and the grass grew stubborn. His ranch was quiet, not lonely, but deliberate. Just him, his cattle, and Ellie, his late brother's girl, who'd come to live with him after the fever took her folks. She was 11 and sharp as a pin, hair always wild, cheeks smudged with flour or ink. If Silas was a man of silence, Ellie was the sound that filled it, humming, questioning, laughing in bursts. She was the one reason he remembered how to smile without being watched. May had met her a few times in town, in the churchyard, mostly, or while buying thread at the mercantile. Ellie liked her instantly, called her the lady with the kind hands. So, when the harvest fair approached and Ellie begged to bake pies for the competition, she said, "Can May come help?" And Silas, after a long pause and a slower nod, said, "Ask her." May stared at the note in her hand for a long while. It was written in Ellie's scrawl, full of flour, smudges, and hopeful loops. "Please come Saturday. We'll make apple pie. I like yours best." She hadn't gone near Silas's ranch before, not for fear, but because no one invited her. She read the note again, then packed her apron, tied her braid in a ribbon, and made the walk, past the creek, past the rock where cottonmouths like to sun, up the hill and through the gate, where sunflowers bowed in the wind. The house was plain, whitewashed wood, faded curtains, smoke curling from the chimney like a whisper. Ellie greeted her at the door, grinning with molasses on her chin. Silas was there too, standing just inside, arms crossed. He nodded once. May nodded back. That was all. But somehow, it felt more polite than 100 empty compliments. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and orchard air. Ellie chattered as she peeled apples, handing May the knife, then the sugar, then a jar of spice. May moved gently, humming under her breath. From the open window, Silas chopped wood, each strike clean, steady, as if it weren't about the wood at all, but the rhythm. His shirt stuck to his back in the heat, his brow damp beneath his hat. May caught herself watching, but when their eyes met, just briefly, he didn't look away. Neither did she. By sundown, the pies were cooling. Ellie was napping with a book across her chest, and May was brushing flour from her sleeves. "Horse, ready for you," Silas said from the porch. "Appreciate it," she said, her voice low. Then the horse stumbled, just a bit, a soft limp in its front left leg. May crouched and checked the hoof. "Stone bruise," she murmured. "Needs rest." Silas nodded, unhitched the reins. "I walk you home." Then, she blinked. "You don't have to." "I know." And that was that. The walk was quiet, not awkward quiet, the kind that holds meaning without filling it with noise. The sky above was softening into twilight, a pink wash spreading over the hills. Crickets began their song. "You're not like the others," May said finally. Silas raised a brow. "You don't stare, or pity, or pretend." He walked a few more steps before answering. "Never learned to be good at pretending." A pause. Then, softer. "Don't reckon you need pity either." May smiled. Small and real. Double quotes no. Just room to breathe. He looked sideways at her. "You got that here." By the time they reached her gate, Stars were peeking through. She turned. To him. Thank you, Silas. He tipped his hat. You're welcome, May. Then he turned and walked the whole way back through the dark, alone, but his stride was lighter than usual, and May, watching him go, felt a strange warmth in her chest, like something long asleep had stirred over the next few weeks. She returned, sometimes with warm bread, sometimes to help Ellie stitch curtains or braid lavender bundles for drying. Each time, Silas would nod from wherever he was, the barn, the fields, the porch. He never asked questions, never hovered, but he always made sure the kettle was warm. And that the ride home was safe. One afternoon, while Ellie was out feeding hens, May sat beside Silas on the porch. They didn't speak. Just watched the sun stretch gold across the valley. Then, he said, quietly, you carry yourself like someone who's been hurt and kept walking anyway. She turned to him, met his eyes. You see that, I do? A breeze lifted the hem of her skirt. She held it still. Most men see only what I carry, not how I carry it. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. Then they're not seeing. That evening, as she walked home, May touched the place on her arm where his sleeve had brushed hers, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel too much. She felt just enough. The weather turned, not all at once. The prairie never changed its mind in a hurry, but slowly, like a song losing tempo. The heat softened, the skies grayed, and the air began to smell like something was coming. By now, May had made herself part of the rhythm at Silas's ranch, not loudly, not with fuss, just with presence, the kind that makes a place feel warmer without anyone needing to say why. She came by with sweetbread and jam, or to help Ellie stitch a quilt for the church raffle. Sometimes she just sat near the coop, talking to the chickens as if they understood every word. They probably did. Silas never asked her to come, but he always noticed when she did. He started mending fences near the porch when she arrived, sharpening tools where she could see him, leaving a chair out that hadn't been there before. He was letting her in, not through words, but through space. One afternoon, Ellie looked up from her sketch pad and said, You should stay the night sometime, Miss May. May chuckled, brushing flour off her skirt. Now why would I do that, little bird? Ellie shrugged. Just seems like you belong here. May didn't answer, but later, when she stood at the edge of the field watching the wind move through the grass, Silas beside her, arms folded, she thought of that word again, belonging. That week, the rain came, harder than it had in years. The sky cracked open and the whole valley turned to silver. May was already at the ranch when it began. She'd come early with jars of pickled beets and new embroidery thread for Ellie. By sundown, it was too heavy to leave. You'll stay, Silas said plainly. Not a question, not a command. Just certain. She looked at him, looked at the storm, rolling in, and nodded. The house was warm. Lanterns lit, a stew bubbled on the stove. Ellie played piano with 2 fingers, humming some half-remembered hymn. And May sat at the kitchen table, watching Silas work, sleeves rolled, hands steady, eyes always aware. She didn't realize she was staring until he looked up and said, Storm makes things clearer. She tilted her head. How so? You can see what leaks, what holds, what stays. May said nothing at first. Then, soft as a falling leaf, You think I leak? He looked at her, really looked, and shook his head. I think you hold more than anyone I've known. Later, after Ellie had gone to bed and the house was wrapped in quiet, May stood by the fire. Silas came to stand beside her, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, of things felt. She sipped, set the cup down. Did you love her? She asked. He didn't need to ask who. He nodded. Very much, he said. May looked into the fire. I was promised once. A man back east said I was lovely. Said he liked my voice, my letters. She paused. Then he saw me. Said I was too much woman for one man's house. Silas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. May smiled, a bitter edge to it. I guess I don't photograph well in the imagination. A long silence. Then Silas spoke, barely more than a whisper. Funny how some folks can't carry anything that's full. May turned her face toward him. The light from the fire flickered across his cheek. His eyes were soft, not pitying, not heavy, just seeing. And in that moment, her throat caught. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't trying to win her. He was being with her. And that meant more than any kiss ever had. The rain tapped the windows like fingers keeping time. She sat beside him, on the floor, close enough to feel his warmth. Sometimes, she said, I dream I'm someone else, lighter, smaller, the kind of woman who gets picked first. He didn't turn to her, but his voice came steady and clear. You weren't made to be picked, May. You were made to stand. She closed her eyes, and let the tears come, not from pain, but from the relief of being known. When morning came, the sky had cleared. The earth shimmered, puddles reflected the clouds like mirrors. May stepped out barefoot into the mud, smiling. Silas watched her from the porch, arms crossed, heart full, though he'd never say so. That night, alone again in her cabin, May lit her lamp and unpinned her braid. In the mirror, she saw herself, but something was different. The shame was gone. The curves were still there. But now, they belonged to her, not to anyone else's judgment, and she wondered, not if Silas would ever kiss her, but if he already had, in every word he never said. The sky was blue as cornflower silk the day the spring dance came round again. 1 year since May had stood under those rafters and felt the weight of laughter fall across her like stones. 1 year since she'd burned a tear into her mama's lace gloves and walked home alone, heart folded in on itself like a forgotten letter. Now, the barn was being dressed in bunting once more. Fiddles were tuned, men trimmed their beards, women ironed dresses, and gossip moved like wildfire in the dry grass of Dry Willow. Silas Coyle might be bringing a guest, they said. Ellie's friend, that one with the hips, the pie baker, the one who, well, bless her heart, doesn't quite fit the usual mold. May had no intention of going. She said so to Ellie 3 times that morning while helping hang laundry and shell peas. But the girl just smiled, sly as a fox, and said, That's all right. I laid out your blue dress anyway. May opened her mouth to protest, then saw it, the dress, folded neat, pressed soft, the same one she'd worn the night she was mocked. The same one that had been tucked away in the back of her wardrobe like a bruise, only now it had been mended, the hem repaired, a silver ribbon added at the waist. By whose hands, she didn't know, but it no longer looked like the dress of a woman trying to disappear. It looked like the kind of dress you wore when you were ready to be seen. She stood at the edge of her porch, staring out at the horizon, braids still undone. And then she heard it, the slow roll of a cart. Silas. He didn't wear anything fancy, just a clean shirt, his good boots, and that look in his eyes that said more than poetry ever could. He stepped down, looked at her, tipped his hat. Evenin'. May glanced away. You come for eggs? No, ma'am. She folded her arms. Then why are you here? A pause. Then, clear and warm, if you're going, I'm going. If you're not, I'll sit with you anyway. They arrived just before sundown. The barn was already full. Lanterns strung like fireflies, music spilling out into the open fields. When May stepped through the doors, conversations paused. Folks turned, some curious, some judgmental, some surprised. She held her head high, shoulders back, ribbon at her waist catching the light. She wasn't the same woman they remembered, and when Silas offered his arm, she took it, not like a question, but like a promise. Thomas Vane saw them. Of course he did. He stood near the punch table, same smug smile, though a little older now, a little more forgotten. He opened his mouth, maybe to mock, maybe to jest, but Silas cut through the air with just a glance, and Thomas fell silent. The music shifted into a slow reel. Boots shuffled. Couples swayed. May stood to the side, unsure, But Silas turned to her and said, "May I?" She hesitated, and then placed her hand in his. The whole barn seemed to hush as they stepped to the center. May's heart beat wild in her chest, but his hand was warm at her back, his step sure, and suddenly it didn't matter who watched, because no one ever had, not truly, until now. They danced slow steady a woman who once tried to vanish. A man who once lived like a ghost, turning together like seasons in a field. The world around them blurred. Only his voice reached her. I was never lonely 'cause I needed company. I was lonely 'cause no one saw me. But you did. The song ended, but the spell didn single quotes t. May looked around the room, heartful, and for once, she didn't feel like a woman who'd been rejected. She felt like a woman who had been chosen, not despite her curves, not in secret, but openly, plainly, and without shame. They walked outside under the stars, his coat over her shoulders. The wind was soft, and for the first time in a long time, she felt safe inside her skin. She turned to him, voice barely a breath. "Why me?" Silas looked at her, then up at the sky. "'Cause when the rain came, you stayed. Some loves don't start with lightning. Some begin like dew, quiet, patient, and soft, but when they bloom, they cover everything.